Well, a high-level South African delegation, we're told, will travel to Tanzania today in the wake of Thabo Bester being apprehended by authorities in that country. That was alongside his accomplice, romantic partner, Dr. Nandipha Magudumana, and a Mozambican national who apparently helped the two of them cross borders from South Africa when they fled the country. Now, as Ground Up, that news publication covered the Bester story from his prison escape to his possible whereabouts after that escape. Several women have also taken to social media to share their experiences of Bester. One woman managed to escape unharmed and has documented her reaction on social media as that story unfolded, and she's documented just feeling incredibly traumatized by the fact that he was, in fact, a free man. So let's shift focus this morning and bring you some analysis on the impact of the story on Bester's victims. We're joined this morning by clinical psychologist Dr. Keitumetse Mashego, joins us via our video line this morning. Dr. Mashego, it's great to see you. Thanks very much indeed for coming on. One can imagine, right, that the toll that this must take on Bester's victims, on those who survived an encounter with him, but just outline for us what they would be going through.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. The reaction obviously is context dependent for the victims, but in summary, what is likely to happen is that they might be triggered, of course, by the fact that this guy is free now, but also the fact that he's not showing remorse. Like, he's never shown remorse, and he's literally just going around about his life and committing more crimes. So this can actually trigger what we call re-victimization of the victims, just from them seeing him be free and running around, but also that there's actual fear of their life and safety at the moment. And also what we call secondary re-traumatization from hearing other victims talk about their own ordeal. You know, just from hearing other people's stories, that this can lead to them reliving their own trauma and actually having a lot of anxiety, as expected, panic, and some of them might actually have flashbacks of their own experience and depression. And sometimes the mind is so powerful that it can internalize other people's stories, and you actually start reimagining what has happened to the other victims.
Yeah, and I mean, one can just imagine that, you know, you might be confined to your home as a result, just from the very real fear of your own personal safety.
Definitely, you know, because, safety emotionally and psychologically and physical safety, because he's had come across as a very dangerous man with antisocial traits in that he's not actually sorry for what he's done. So doing it again might not be a problem for him, right? And, of course, the narrative that's also going on social media about him being fairly highly connected, that's also not helping the anxiety that becomes very real for the victims, which is actually very sad for them. And I've always emphasized that there's a need for them to have support. Yeah. It's not always, and it shouldn't just be the families and people around them, but actually professional support, because the anxiety can be so paralyzing, as you're stating, that the victim is unable to actually go about their day or go to work or actually have panic attacks, which are not very nice to have.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Dr. Mashego, what you're saying is a big part of, someone who might have been a victim or a survivor of an attack by Thabo Bester or anyone else who's a survivor of rape. A big part of them and their recovery is seeing justice being done.
It's a big part of it, but, unfortunately, it's not always the case. But that's not to say that without justice that one cannot actually overcome, heal, survive, and carry on with their lives. So it's almost about finding that balance, that even if this person is arrested or the justice served, this person might actually never say sorry or feel remorse for what they have done to you. So it's always important that the victims do the work within about how they are thinking about what has happened to them, and also understanding that sometimes, you'll never actually get the person to admit that they were wrong or to, confess or apologize. So it's very important for the the victims, unfortunately, to take responsibility for their own healing journey, which is always unfair. And that's the thing with psychological problems, is that someone will traumatize you unfairly, but it's on you to actually take responsibility for your own healing.
Yeah. Does the justice system, Dr. Mashego, does the justice system take into account what you've just said, the impact of an escape like this, of justice not being done when it comes to cases of rape? Is it a driving force behind what the justice system does in cases like this?
Sadly, it should be. Ideally, it should be, but that's not the case. Unfortunately, in our justice system, you find people who should be arrested have been released because of either, not enough evidence. There's always a lot of legal things that play a role in such cases. But it's always important to prioritize the victim, that, we need to make sure that the victim is protected physically, but also just give them the emotional support that they will always need, and they might always need it for the rest of their lives, because this is, quite significant. It changes one, significantly. So there's a need for them to continually do the work for themselves, like now being triggered by this Bester's escape. Obviously, it's going to trigger a lot of emotion. So this means that the victims need to actually seek out the help for themselves professionally, right? And if our justice system was doing what it's supposed to be doing, there should be support groups for these victims. There should be ongoing support for these victims, especially when there's such a narrative or a story is unfolding about the escape. But unfortunately, that's not what is done. But I will encourage all the victims for themselves to seek out the individual, emotional, professional support from qualified clinical psychologists. And people always talk about the cost, but there are free services out there available. Yeah. And so, when they're feeling the anxiety, their feelings are very valid. It's understandable while they'll feel anxious, while they'll be triggered, while they will relive this thing. So it's very important for them to just seek out the help that's out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Mashego, I wonder if you mind me putting you on the spot, since we have you here on the line. There are so many issues we can unpack, right, insofar as this Thabo Bester's matter is concerned, and you being a clinical psychologist. For one, his partner in this, Dr. Nandipha Magudumana. Of course, everything that we say here will be speculation. You've not spoken to her. We've not had the opportunity to speak to her. But from the facts that are on the table, what can you tell us about a relationship like this? For someone who would have known that this is a convicted rapist and murderer, and who appears to be in, shall we say, an intimate relationship with someone like that. How do you read that situation?
I think there's a lot of, as you're saying, this is based on speculation. I haven't had a discussion with her, but there is always the evidence that people who get into such relationships knowingly are usually people who are functioning from a place of trauma. This is basically from where they're coming from, so their childhood. So there could have been, some sort of trauma that has led her to be this person. And also there could be also that sometimes the victims identify with the perpetrator, and they cling on to a perpetrator, and then in their future relationships actually get involved with perpetrators, typical of what they experienced in their childhood or in their past relationship. So it's always a complexity of things that can lead a person to actually be in a relationship. And one of those things is also their self-esteem, and also their own personality development. It'd be interesting to just see, what sort of personality dynamics are at play here, because obviously there is something not so natural about what's happening with her choosing this person to be their partner. So there's a lot of things that can speculate about, but one of the big things is that the people who identify with perpetrators, usually they themselves have been victims, and the psychological impact of that is that the person is just functioning on autopilot and choosing partners that actually are not good for them. Yeah. So it's almost like an underlying subconscious thing happening there. But, it's very important that the person who actually experiences trauma, whatever type of trauma, that we seek help, because then it always plays out later in life, sometimes in cases such as what we see with the partner.
Yeah. I suppose, one of the more worrying things about this case as well is the fact that Dr. Magudumana also has 2 young children who apparently she would have also, through her relationship with Thabo Bester, exposed them to him.
Yes, and that's the sad part with someone who is not okay. When someone is, especially where it involves the personality of the person, they are so caught up in their own psychopathology that they are unable to be logical or to make decisions that are safe for their own children. So there is no logic when it comes to pathology. I always say to people that sometimes we try to, want to sit with this person to understand why you're doing what you're doing. Are you not scared for your children? But there is no logic when someone has some psychiatric disorders. There is no logic to that. And therefore, we cannot apply logical analysis when it comes to this. And not to excuse her behavior, of course, because if she's putting the children at risk, as is the narrative that's being told, obviously we need to protect the children now. That's why then you get objective help to make sure that we step in to remove the children if they are in that situation that's being told, that's being, the story that's being told out there. So we need to make sure that we protect those kids. And but she herself, obviously, if the narrative is true, she's unable to be the mother that is, protective, or the mother that is needed by those children.
Sure. Dr. Keitumetse Mashego, let me thank you for your time this morning. Thanks for weighing in, giving us your analysis on the story. Dr. Mashego is a clinical psychologist.